thank you everyone for taking the time out of your evening to come to this class. This is Small Ruminant Care for Beginners. And just so you know, there'll be a Q&A at the end of the class. So you can throw there'll be a Q&A at the end of my presentation and also Dr. Worley's. So you can throw your questions in the chat as I'm presenting. I won't be able to see them, but Ronnie or Dr. Worley may be able to answer them. And otherwise, we'll just address them at the end of my presentation. So we put this class together because goats and sheep are so popular across the Tri-County area and statewide and nationwide. They're just a really popular animal to raise. And the objective of this class is that folks walk away feeling more confident in their journey of learning how to raise small ruminants, and that no matter what the animal is being raised for, their welfare is always centered and their health is always the priority. And as you can imagine, this is a big subject and it's taken a lot of work to condense it down to the basics. So you might have gotten my email today. I sent a comprehensive resource list and it expands upon all the subjects I'm speaking about this evening, from pasture management to feeding for different life stages and best practices for parasite management. So to begin, I'm Claire Menard. I'm with WSU Kitsap Extension. But before this job, I farmed for 6 years, including on a goat dairy and also a sheep and goat farm that raised the animals for meat. In this picture here, I am grooming the bucks in the buck pen because they smelled so bad, but they generally got a lot less love than the milking does got. So I would go in there and groom them, and they were very cute. But yeah, that was in a past life. Now my role is the new and beginning farmer education coordinator through WSU Kitsap, and I also work within the WSU Regional Small Farms, which means we combine resources and collaborate to bring education like this across all 3 counties, and that's Kitsap, Clallam, and Jefferson counties. We're also joined by Ronnie Ryan, who's a farmer and the owner of Sage and Willow Farm in Paulsbo. She's been raising small ruminants for over 14 years. And like I said, after my presentation, we'll have a Q&A session with Ronnie to speak about her experiences raising sheep and goats over the years. And we're also joined by Dr. Mary Margaret Worley, a doctor of veterinary medicine at Sound Equine in Paulsbo. She specializes in small ruminant care, and she'll spend the second half of the class speaking about small ruminant health and the first aid and the various emergencies that arise on the farm when raising small ruminants. All right. So starting out, it's good to ask yourself why you want goats and sheep. And it could be one or more of these reasons. And it could be a business to pay for itself or to make a profit. And that business could be based on milk or products you can make with milk, like cheese or soap. Could be for meat or for wool. Or you could be wanting these animals to have as pets or to rescue them. And your answer will directly affect different decisions you'll be forced to make. So for example, if this is a pet, you'll have to deal with your goats and sheep aging. And just like other elderly pets, they have different needs, feed, and health issues at age 10 than when they are young. And if you want to make a profit, you'll have to make difficult decisions. This means culling sheep or goats who are no longer productive or who have unfavorable genes. And sometimes that can be your favorite animal, which is a really hard decision for farmers to make. So be honest with yourself. What decisions are you unwilling to make? Acquiring new animals is a commitment to their welfare, and so it's a big responsibility. So you'll want to make some assessments before getting your animals and assess your various resources. Acquiring ruminants is a big energy, financial, and lifestyle investment. It means responding to emergencies, being home multiple times a day for feeding, checking on animals and fencing, monitoring animal health, finding skilled farm sitters when you go on vacation, which can be hard to do, It also means paying for infrastructure, feed, and vet bills. So ask yourself the questions, what's the size and quality of your available pasture? And where will you purchase supplemental feed? And how much will you need to purchase? What do you have on your property already for housing and fencing? What will you have to construct or update? How will you educate yourself about and manage your animal's health? Is there a vet in your area willing to treat small farm animals? They can be hard to find. So once you do those assessments, where will you purchase your goats or sheep? You want to make sure the animals you're getting are healthy, and the best way to do this is from someone known in the community or a breeder with a good reputation and with references. And this is because goats and sheep can come with a host of diseases and parasites. If you're getting them from a place like a sales barn, they can go in healthy, and because they're exposed to other animals from other farms, they can come out with potentially contagious diseases. And the same goes if you're getting them from someone on Craigslist. You don't know how they were raised or in what conditions. If you already have animals and you're adding to your herd, it's a good idea to quarantine them for at least a couple weeks, ideally 30 to 60 days. And to start, you'll need to know the signs of good health and of illness in animals, which I cover a little bit and Dr. Worley will also cover. And you'll want to make sure you inspect their hooves for hoof rot because this is contagious. And you'll want to look at the entire herd you're purchasing from, not just the babies. Is everyone in good health? Do you see a lot of signs of lice and mites, which looks like itching, rubbing, and biting at the fleece or coat? You'll also want to ask some questions. Have they been castrated, docked, or disbutted? Unless you plan on breeding your animals, you should only purchase wethers or castrated males. Bucks and rams, which is the words for intact males, that have to be kept separate from females at all times unless they're breeding, and they tend to be harder to manage. And then docking is the shortening of the tail, and it protects lambs from fly strike. Not all sheep need to be docked, including hair sheep. And lastly, disbudding is the removal of horns from kid goats. And horns can pose a risk to goats, other animals, and their handlers. And also, horns can get caught in fencing, which can cause major injury to the animals and sometimes death because they can break their neck just fighting to get free from the fence. Some other good questions is, did the babies receive their CDT vaccine? This is a three-way vaccine and refers to the C and D types of enterotoxemia into tetanus. And so when you purchase lambs or kids, you should also give them a type D vaccine at time of purchase and another 2 to 4 weeks later. And another question is, did the dams, which is a word for mother does and ewes, did they also get their CDT shot in their third trimester? And what this does is it gives the kid or lamb passive immunity, and it's a best practice. And then also, you need to ask, how often is the herd dewormed? If the entire herd you're buying from is dewormed on a schedule or a monthly basis, be wary of these animals. They could have a parasite that's resistant to dewormers. And you'll learn more about proper and improper deworming protocols later on in Dr. Worley's presentation.
We have a quick question here,
Yeah, go
Claire.
ahead.
Um, Lexi was asking if you said all sheep needed to have their tails docked, including hair sheep, or just some of them.
No, generally, I don't believe hair sheep need to have their tails docked. And not all farmers dock their animals' tails, but it is recommended by a lot of farmers to dock the lamb tails. And we can talk further about that with Ronnie. She might have some things to say about that. So I just wanted to quickly go over some breeds of different goats and sheep that are popular in the Pacific Northwest. So each one comes with their own breed specific traits. So talk to your neighbors and do your research. Some of these animals are better for milk, some for meat, some for wool, and some are multi-purpose. So here we have like a Nigerian dwarf, a Nubian, a boar, La Mancha, Pygmy, and Alpine. And the boar is a meat goat, and these others are milking goats. And my favorite is the Nubian. I just love their floppy ears. They're so cute. Um, and then we have some sheep breeds here. We have the Chevois, the Katahdin, Icelandic, Suffolk, Dorper, and Dorset. And then it's good to know that the Katahdin and Dorper are hair sheep, which means they don't need to be sheared. They shed their coat naturally. So before you bring them home, you'll want to decide whether you want goats or sheep, and you might already have a good idea of what you want. But it's good to talk to people to find out what fits your personality and lifestyle. People often say that goats have a little more personalities, but they are escape artists and they really like to get out of fencing, and sheep can be a little more docile. Most people get weaned kids or lambs, and some people buy adult animals. It's really your preference, and also it depends on what you plan to do with those animals. But goats and sheep are herd animals, so it's highly stressful for them to be alone. And most farmers won't sell you a single animal if you don't already have a friend for them at home. And additionally, one goat and one sheep isn't an adequate pairing because they don't speak the same language, they don't communicate the same way. And so they need to have at least one friend of the same species. And then when you're transporting, make sure you have air ventilation, like don't put them in a trunk or a U-Haul trailer. All goats and sheep entering Washington state must be accompanied by a certificate of veterinary inspection, ensuring they're free from clinical signs or known exposure to any infectious or communicable diseases. And I included a web page describing that in greater detail in the resource list. And then if traveling any sort of distance, especially during the summer, bring emergency water because this can be life-saving. A pet carrier is usually adequate for like 1 to 2 baby animals. So think about like a little dog carrier, a little dog cage. And then you'll want enough space to avoid overcrowding, especially in the heat. Overstocking can raise the heat to extreme temperatures. If hauling only a few animals, too much space in a livestock trailer can actually be dangerous. So use the partition walls to avoid them getting tossed around on windy roads or from sudden braking. And then sheep and goats together, this can be a controversial subject. Some people say never have them together. Some people say it's totally fine. And whether they can be together really depends on the herd's individual and collective personalities. So I read in some places that goats can really be bullies, and then um, people are also saying that sheep can really be bullies. And what that looks like is a lot of resource guarding, like over food or sleeping areas. But this happens within the species as well. They can do it to each other, like goats to goats and sheep to sheep. I have read that it helps to get them all as babies. On some farms, goats and sheep raised together as babies either ignored each other or they would cuddle and play together. They do share the same diseases and parasites, so it's important that you're acquiring healthy, disease-free animals from either species. And it's important to know that they need different minerals. So if goats eat only sheep minerals, they'll wind up copper deficient, and copper deficiency can kill goats. On the other hand, if sheep eat only goat minerals, they could wind up with copper toxosis, which could kill them as the copper levels build up in their liver. And one way around this issue is putting them away at night in different areas of the barn or in different shelters where they have access to their own species specific minerals. All right, and now that you have your sheep or goats or both, you'll need to consider arguably the biggest questions when raising small ruminants is how many animals can my land support and how much should I feed my animal? And so as far as land support, there's not a single answer. It really varies farm to farm. And understanding how much food is out there for your animal is something that's going to take time to train your eye. And this is where it's really good to depend on county specialists for support. because they know a lot about pasture health and carrying capacity, which is to say how many animals your pasture can feed. And then how much should I feed my animal? This answer also varies widely, but as a general rule of thumb, sheep and goats need to consume 2 to 4% of their body weight daily in feed to meet their nutrition requirements. And this figure is in DM, or dry matter, which is an acronym you'll see a lot. So think of hay, which is dry grass. And there are feeding tables in some of the documents I included on the resource list, which are especially important for feeding growing or pregnant or lactating animals who have higher nutritional needs. And I'm sure you've seen these common misconceptions before, like my goat can live off blackberry brambles and weeds. While weeds are often beneficial for goats, they won't eat every weed and they don't provide a complete necessary diet. So goats, just like humans, can be super picky, and goats often have to be trained by their mothers when it comes to eating certain weeds, such as blackberries. So what they do and don't eat can be specific to the individual as well as the culture of their herd. Another misconception is that my goat or sheep can be used to mow my lawn. So, unfortunately, grazers don't usually graze uniformly. One patch of the pasture will be a foot tall, another will only be a couple inches. So, this is why farmers often mow their pasture after grazers have been run through to encourage uniform growth. Also, sheep will graze anything head height and lower. Goats will climb rocks and trees to get at something tasty. So if your lawn has any sort of landscaping, a lot of it won't be safe from sheep and none of it will be safe from goats. And lastly, as you'll see in the following slides, you'll need to provide supplemental, which is to say purchased feed for your animals. And then feed needs change based on age, time of year, and the status of the animal, which means the status, when I say that, it's whether they are about to breed, whether they're pregnant, lactating, or if they're growing, like a lamb or kid. So the healthiest herds are fed the right nutrition at the right stage. And it's always good to remember that long stem forage is the best feed you can provide your animal to keep their rumen functioning properly. And when I say long stem forage, I'm talking about grass, forbs, and browse. The grass can either be pasture or hay, hay being pasture that has been cut, dried, and baled for later consumption but isn't pelleted. And forbs are any broadleaf, non-grass plant. Sheep prefer this even over grass, and forbs are highly nutritious. Examples of forbs are clover, alfalfa, or weeds like dandelion and plantain. And browse is what goats prefer, like bushy, leafy trees, bushes, or vines with tender or woody stems. And this graphic shows the difference and overlap in what goats and sheep eat. You can see that goats, they're really into browse, and then sheep are kind of more into forbs, but they also really like grass a lot. And there's a vast variety of grass that makes up pasture, some preferable to and more nutritious than others. How they eat is goats like to eat with their heads up and as high as they can reach, while sheep prefer to eat low to the ground and close together, and they will eat a wide variety of weeds. And what they prefer is individual, specific to their herd, and breed specific. And pasture health. So just so you're aware, there could be a whole class devoted to this single subject. And I did include a link in the resource list to a book that's all about pasture management in the Pacific Northwest. And there's a free PDF to it if you really want to delve deep. And there's also a webinar on that resource list that serves as kind of an intro and goes way more in depth than I could. And also pay attention to classes around your own counties and throughout the state because pasture health is a really popular subject. And there's usually several classes throughout the year put on by various organizations. And like I said, there's also specialists in your counties that you can lean on to learn more about pasture. And I included contact information for Jefferson, Clallam, and Kitsap counties on there. And when I talk about pasture, I'm talking about the grass and forbs you can provide your ruminants. And these, along with browse, are usually the primary and most economical source of nutrients for your sheep and goats. And the carrying capacity of your pasture, or how many animals your pasture can support, depends on a lot of factors that interplay with each other beyond mere square footage. So some of those factors are overall rainfall, whether it's during the rainy spring or the drought of summer, soil type and soil health, whether the field floods all winter or drains quickly, whether the pasture is at the top, on, or at the bottom of a slope, what forage is growing there, just to say what kind of grass and forbs are growing there, because they're not all equal. And then also, you have to consider prior management techniques before you moved onto that property. Has that pasture been overgrazed in the past, or was it properly managed? And the best way, again, to learn more about pasture is to seek out resources, talk to your neighbors, and seek specialist help. So many people around Western Washington raising sheep and goats lack adequate amounts of pasture, especially in more urban counties like Kitsap County. But devoting your time to learning more about rotational grazing practices can maximize the amount of forage you could provide for your animal. This will create a win-win scenario where you're increasing their health and reducing your feed costs. And rotational grazing, simply put, is using fencing to break your pasture into smaller pastures, moving the animals from one section to the next, and allowing adequate time for the grazed pasture to regrow. And by not allowing the animals to overgraze, you're protecting the grass so it can regenerate. And this means moving the animals when the grass has been grazed down to 4 inches. Some water. And so I'll provide an really oversimplified crash course in pasture growth. So it grows on an S curve. And the bottom of this curve, at the very bottom, is slow. So this is when the pasture's been overgrazed and the plant has really small leaves. And so it can only take in so much sunlight, and this results in slow growth. And it probably has pretty damaged roots as well. And then the top of that steep part of the curve is where it's fast. It's put on enough biomass to take in a lot more nutrients, a lot more sunlight, and grow a lot exponentially faster. And then when you reach the plateau and the downward slope, this is when the grass is mature and the plant starts to go to seed. The animals don't prefer this, and generally they're not going to eat that mature pasture. So the best time to put your animals on pasture is at the top of the fast phase and move them before they can overgraze, which is to say no shorter than 4 inches. And knowing what the second stage looks like in real life and when to put your animals back on pasture is a skill that will take time to hone. It's also important to remember that overgrazing doesn't occur from the numbers of animals on the pasture, but time spent on the pasture. So proper rotational grazing focuses on moving the animals when they need to be moved. And proper pasture techniques also help control parasites. So parasite larvae crawl up the grass blades only a short distance. Thus, most are found near the soil surface. This is also why it's best to move your animals when the pasture has been grazed down to 4 inches and no shorter. And you'll learn more about the parasite cycle in Dr. Worley's presentation. So sheep and goats often lack nutrients due to poor quality pastures and roughage or inadequate amounts of feed. And because of this, energy is the most common limiting factor in small ruminant nutrition. And this deficiency in nutrition will result in decreased production, reproductive failure, increased mortality, and increased susceptibility to diseases and parasites. This is why, unless you have ample pasture, you'll probably need to supplement feed. And the downside of supplementing feed is that it can be costly. And the most common and usually the most economical source of supplemental feed is hay, which you're all familiar with, I'm guessing. So you'll likely need to buy hay for winter, during times of drought, or when you have inadequate pasture. And you'll buy it from nearby feed stores or hay sellers. And good quality hay will be green, soft, dry, sweet smelling, and free of mold and excessive dust. Good quality hay will be orchard grass, which is higher in protein, and timothy. Ruminants tend to prefer second cut. First cutting tends to be too coarse and less palatable. And then alfalfa is a very rich protein source, but it's more expensive and it can't be the sole source of feed for certain animals as it can cause health problems. It's actually excellent for pregnant, lactating, and growing animals, but it's not suitable for wethers or bucks. They can develop issues from the amount of calcium that alfalfa provides. And here's some examples of feeders, and these are really important so that you limit feed waste and also to prevent the animals from eating hay contaminated with their own waste. And then you can see this feeder here, it's high enough that the goats can't get their hooves in it. And also you can see these mineral trays down here. And then this is an example of what not to do with your feed. This is a huge waste of feed and will probably become bedding. So other options for supplemental feed are pellets, concentrates, or grain. And pellets are pelleted hay or alfalfa. And concentrates are generally pelleted grain like corn, oats, wheat, barley, or protein supplements like soybean, cottonseed, or fish meal. Pellets, concentrates, and grain are an excellent supplement for ruminants' diet, especially for growing animals, pregnant, or lactating animals. And they should still be fed long-stemmed hay every day to keep their rumen functioning properly. And this is because when ruminants chew, they produce bicarbonate. And long-stemmed hay, grass, forbs, and browse makes ruminants chew a lot. When they eat pelleted food, grains, or concentrates, they really don't have to chew much at all. And this can lead to ruminal acidosis, which can cause death. So you can prevent this by providing free choice baking soda. When feeding grain, feed them cracked or rolled grain. Fine ground doesn't make them chew an adequate amount, but they don't chew enough for whole grains, which can lead to expensive feed waste. There is also complete sheep and goat feed, which provides 100% of their nutritional needs, but it's much more expensive. And then when you're storing any grain or pelleted food, make sure it's stored securely where animals can't access it because overeating can cause serious complications, including bloat. And it's also important to make sure it's secure from rats or mice. And in that same vein, make sure hay or alfalfa bales are dry when they're stored and kept dry for the entirety of their storage. And then I saw that we had a question, but if you could just throw it in the chat, you can get to it at the end of the presentation if that works. And so as far as minerals are concerned, soils can be deficient in important minerals, which leads to deficient pasture and hay. So ruminants need free choice minerals. And the most important minerals are salt, calcium, and phosphorus, as well as selenium and copper for goats. And free choice salt and minerals should be made available to ruminants at all times. Loose is preferable to a salt lick block because it takes less physical effort to get adequate amounts and it can be adjusted according to their needs. Minerals should be kept out of the rain, and again, sheep and goat minerals should be kept separate to avoid giving sheep too much copper. And then the importance of water is obvious, but it's often overlooked. So your animals should have access to clean, fresh water at all times. And an important consideration when setting up your pastures is how will the animals access water and how will you refill your water troughs? A mature animal will consume between 3/4 of a gallon to 1.5 gallons of water each day. Water intake increases substantially during late gestation and lactation and when temperatures go over 70 degrees. And then on to housing. You might already have an option for housing for your animals, or you may need to construct something new. It's important to know that many counties require that small ruminants are provided with housing or shelter. And from an animal welfare standpoint, small ruminants can suffer without housing, especially goats who are desert animals. Whatever you build, it can be a simple three-sided structure, and more than one structure is ideal, especially if you have animals that bully and block other animals from the shelter. And it should include a feeding area if you're not on pasture, and they should also, wherever they're housed, have access to water and minerals. And portable shelters through pasture are especially handy for parasite control. A barn or more permanent structure is also great, especially for lambing or kidding season when the mamas and babies need a clean, dry area where they can bond and be monitored. And make sure to research your local county ag codes before installing permanent structures, as there's often language about setbacks from the road concerning feeding and housing animals. It's also important to remember that ventilation is just as important as protection from the rain. You also need to provide bedding because it's necessary to absorb urine and waste in sleeping and feeding areas, especially during the fall and winter when they're more confined to a small area and spending a lot more time in their shelter. Bedding's also necessary for lambing and kidding time when sanitary conditions are especially important for the health of vulnerable young animals. As far as options, straw is the most popular choice, but you could also use poor quality or cheap hay, wood shavings, sawdust, or bedding pellets. And whatever the structure, make sure there's enough room for both feeding and sleeping. And you don't want them so crowded that they're pooping right where they eat or in their feeders, which will increase parasite load. And then for planning ahead, devote a space near the barn for composting soiled bedding far away from water sources like ponds or streams. And here's some examples of simple structures. This is just like a hog panel or cattle panel with a tarp and some T-posts. So pretty simplified. You can see it has 3 walls. It's movable, which is good for preventing manure buildup. And the tarps are stretched tightly and fastened with zip ties, and so that prevents the goats from trying to scramble up it. This is another example. This is just a recycled grain bin, and it's low to the ground, so that keeps them a lot warmer. But goats will also climb. It kind of looks like they've already been climbing it. Another important piece of animal management is your fencing, and the primary purpose is to contain your livestock. And this is especially essential, like good quality, adequate fencing is essential for goats because they're highly skilled escape artists and they're really good at deciding to get loose right around your dinner time or when you're about to go to bed or when you're already in bed. And you also want fencing to deter predators like coyotes or neighborhood dogs. You'll use fencing to separate intact males from females to prevent unwanted pregnancies. And usually you'll have to use more than one fence for your males to separate them. Fencing is also essential for containing rams and bucks, which can be especially dangerous if they are larger, have horns, or if you have children. It's also necessary for pasture rotation, and you can either have permanent or temporary fencing or both. And permanent is the most secure. It creates a physical boundary and sometimes an electric barrier as well, and it's more expensive. Temporary uses electrification as a deterrent to both stock and predators. So in this first example, we have a high tensile electric fence. It's probably made with 4 to 6 strands of electric wire. And that's a permanent fence. And then this is another example of a permanent fence. This is woven wire, and it needs to be less than 4 inches of opening, or else heads can get stuck. One thing to note is I'm not a big fan of this barbed wire up top. Especially if you have goats that like to climb, they could really injure themselves on this barbed wire. And I wanted to include this to show what happens when you have fence that is too big. They stick their heads right through, probably trying to get grass on the other side. And you can see how dangerous this would be. Like if this goat had horns, it would not be good. And then here are some examples of temporary fencing. This is poly wire and it's strung up on these plastic posts, and then it's electrified so the animals can't get past or they don't want to get past. You can also use poly tape, and both kinds of those fencing involve weed whacking. You'll want to weed whack around the bottom to avoid vegetation from touching the wires and causing them to short out and lose their electrification. And the number of strands you use, you'll want to probably use at least 2 to 3. And that depends on the animals, their eagerness to get out, and their age, size, and ability to duck under wires. So lambs and kids are going to be much more able to duck under electric wires than adults. And electric netting is more expensive and it takes time to learn how to quickly set it up, but it is the most effective temporary fencing. And I wanted to include this because I wish I had known this, would have saved me a lot of trouble. Poor grounding is the lead cause of electric fence failure. I had no idea. Really good to know. And also, the energizer or charger is obviously the heart of the electric fencing system. And you'll want a 4,000 to 4,500 volt charger for your sheep and goats. All right, and I wanted to include this because it's a picture of my dog. And so these were some bottle fed lambs, and he was super interested in them, but surprisingly very gentle. But I also wanted to highlight a common problem for sheep and goat farmers because both the people I knew on Lopez Island that were raising sheep, they lost some of their favorite sheep to neighbors' dogs, including one that was like a really important ewe. And so really devastating to the farmer. And these dogs had owners who thought they could be trusted off leash around these animals. So please make sure that you have adequate fencing, preferably electric too, and educate your neighbors about keeping your animals safe. Which brings us to predation control. So, depending on where you live, how urban or rural, you'll likely need some form of livestock guardian. And dogs are definitely the most common and effective, but they're the costliest as far as feed and vet bills go. And some common breeds that you've probably heard of are Pyrenees, Anatolian, and Maremma. Llamas and donkeys are also an option. They both have a natural dislike of canines, so that can be coyotes and neighborhood dogs. They are both best used for guarding small pastures. And if you do get a donkey, only get a jenny, which is the name for female donkeys, or a gelding, which is a castrated male. And then some routine care for your animals is that you'll want to trim their hooves. And hoof trimming is required when keeping goats or sheep. And without trimming, the hooves can become overgrown, which causes them pain, discomfort, infection, and disease. And how quickly hooves grow and thus need to be trimmed depends on health, breed, genetics, feed, and management. And sheep and goats in our area require more frequent trimming, and that's because of the rainfall. It keeps the ground a lot softer, and so their hooves wear down a lot slower compared to drier, rockier regions. And aim to trim hooves when they are softer, like after rain or heavy dew. And most breeds of sheep grow wool continuously and need to be sheared once or twice a year, and the frequency depends on the breed of sheep. And you can also consider getting a hair sheep like a Katahdin or Dorper because they shed their coat naturally and don't need to be sheared. Ideally, you'll shear your sheep before lambing so it's easier for lambs to nurse, but you can do something called crutching, which involves shearing around the vulva and the udders. And you should shear before summer for the comfort of the animal, and it also prevents lice, mites, and fly strike. So most sources say that the lifespan of sheep and goats is 10 to 12 years, though some are productive past 10 and live well into their teens. But with aging comes a variety of issues. And so it's good to be aware of these, especially if you keep your sheep or goats as pets or rescues. So some of the issues is that they don't compete as well for feed and their teeth are often very worn down or completely gone. And missing teeth makes it harder for them to graze, especially if the pasture is short. Older animals may need supplemental feed, such as hay or concentrates. And hay pellets especially can be a good source of feed, and adding water to any feed will make it easier for them to chew. Some other issues is that their immune system is more susceptible to diseases and parasitic worms, and some diseases might not appear until they're older. And arthritis also might be an issue. And when it comes time to deal with an animal who's deceased, no matter their age, know the rules and regulations around burying or composting your animal on your property. Also good to ask if your vet cremates animals. And ultimately, it's really good to have a plan for when you do lose an animal because it can happen really unexpectedly. So Dr. Worley's presentation will cover a variety of diseases and parasites, but it's good to get to know your animals so that you know what their baseline normal and healthy looks like. And these are questions you'll turn to before first purchasing your animals and thereafter as you monitor the health of your herd. So, are they lively and inquisitive? Do they have an appetite? Is their coat glossy and smooth? Are their eyes bright and clear? And is their manure the proper consistency, which is to say firm, round pellets? And the best thing you can do for your herd to prevent health problems from escalating is pasture rotation and providing sanitary conditions, especially where they feed. Also, Dr. Worley will be covering how to do body condition scoring, which is a system of ranking the health of your animals. And I also, in that resource list, provided a variety of links for learning more about body condition scoring. All right, so looking forward, the best tool that you have is your power of observation. So learn what's normal for your animals, how they look and act when they are healthy and at their best. And this is the best way to catch problems before they progress into something more serious. You can also seek evidence-based resources from experienced farmers, extensions, and universities. And there's a lot of information on the internet that's not backed by research or it's based on out-of-date research. And raising animals has always been a communal activity, just like farming has always been a communal activity. So befriend neighbors and locals who raise animals and learn from them. And if you do want to sell any of the products you produce, like milk, cheese, meat, or wool, there are regulations around those items that you'll have to be made aware of. And again, in that resource list, I included a link to the WSDA Green Book, and it has a lot of fact sheets on all the various things you could sell. And there's so much more that I wanted to cover in this presentation. And anyone who raises goats and sheep will notice I didn't touch on breeding. And that's because it's just way too large of a subject. And there are a lot of important things to educate yourself on that are imperative to the welfare of your animals. So I just felt like it would be irresponsible to only cover a few of those things. But again, in that resource list, there's a lot of websites, web pages that cover breeding and are a really good intro to that subject. Which brings me to the sources I use. These are the resources I leaned heavily upon when I built this presentation. And first and foremost is Susan Shonian. She's a former professor at University of Maryland, and she manages both these websites, which again are in that resource list, as well as this website, which covers both sheep and goats and just contains a vast library of information. And I used a lot of the material she generously provides for free to the public to share with you all. And also I use the small ruminant toolbox built by Sarah and NCAT. All right. I know that was a lot of information for all of you get all at once, but I'm going to stop sharing my screen and yeah, we'll shift next into a Q&A with Farmer Ronnie Ryan, and then we will Dr. Worley will be presenting. Let's see. And it looks like there was lots of conversation going on in the chat.
We have a few questions that have come up through
Okay.
this.
Yeah.
The first one I recall seeing is what's the best ratio for hay to pelleted alfalfa and feed? Um, and anyone's welcome to chime in on this. I personally wouldn't go more than about a 1-to-1 ratio between your grass hay and your everything else, but it's going to depend on your individual situation and what your animals are dealing with and what kind of work you're asking them to do.
Okay. Oh, and I see Katie Crowley is here. And she's another farmer in Kitsap as well. She raises sheep. Hi, Katie.
Hey.
Okay.
We had somebody else was asking if we could go over the minerals for goats one more time.
Okay. And were there any specific questions about the minerals, or was the person who asked about elderly animals, is that someone else?
I believe that's someone else, and there's not
Okay.
generally too much difference in your elderly goats. I will just say that they may have more trouble competing for mineral access, and so it may be worthwhile to directly supply minerals to them as opposed to having a free choice bin for everyone.
Yeah, so just going back over that minerals portion of the presentation, you just ruminants need minerals because, well, like goats are from the desert, so we're raising them in an environment that they're not used to genetically. And a lot of the times our soils here can be deficient in certain minerals, just like elsewhere, has different mineral deficiencies. And so there's just generally mixes that you can purchase. One's for sheep, one's for goats, and it's already come pre-mixed, and that's what you feed to your animals. And there are salt lick blocks as well, but I read that they recommend loose just because it's easier to access loose minerals than it is to sit there and lick. All right, does that answer those questions? Let's see.
I'll add one more thing if I can.
Yeah, go
Um,
for it, Ronnie.
yeah, I feed loose minerals for my animals, goat specific and sheep specific, but I have Himalayan salt licks all over the place
Oh,
because
okay, cool.
every living creature on this planet needs salt, right? Except for like slugs, I guess. I don't know, they probably don't, but um and they really enjoy it. So I
Yeah,
just encourage that also. Keep it out of the rain, just like anything else, but yeah.
cool. That's great advice. And it looks like someone named Blake has a question. You can either unmute or you can just drop it in the chat.
Okay. Can you hear me?
Yep, I can hear you.
Hi. Sorry I'm late, but I'm looking to get into sheep, hopefully here, Idaho. Really, I'm late to this, but sorry.
No worries.
I have a 2.5 year old, and well, how long does it take as a business owner, like to break even with sheep? Like, I'm not trying to get rich, just have like a I'll be retiring and have a little bit pension out of the army, and was hoping to get into sheep. And yeah, I know that's a hard question for y'all to answer, but not like to make $10,000 or $20,000 a year with sheep. Do you have to get like 100 or more? I guess really that's my big question.
Yeah, that is a big question. And I can provide some resources to you. You'll want to make a business plan and an enterprise budget. An enterprise budget is really going to show you what your expenses are going to be and how many sheep you need to raise to make the profit that you're aiming for. So I'll get your email and I can send
That
those
sounds great.
for the class. Yeah.
Thank you. I appreciate it. I know it's off the wall, but this has been great material so far.
Good. All right, so I have some questions for Ronnie, but if other folks have some questions, oh yeah, it looks like Carissa has a question.
Hey, hi Claire. Hey
Hi,
Ronnie.
Carissa.
Okay, so my question is when we first had our traveling vet come out and check out our first rescue goat, we knew nothing about goats and we had just picked up some feed from the feed store, and she had said like no grains ever, ever, ever for males.
Right.
So only, well, neutered males specifically, but so that really scared me, and it kind of scared me away from male goats for a while, until I just learned more and felt more comfortable. But I guess I'm just curious as to all of your recommendations when it comes to feeding male goats. We don't feed any grain now across the board, just I guess as a little bit. I mean, there's a lot of fear there that it could cause harm. But when it comes to grains, is there any safe amount? Is there any safe level for male goats?
I would say at this point, we don't know. We know there's a correlation between urinary stone formation and a high grain diet, but the research doesn't show yet, if you feed absolutely no grain versus if you feed a quarter cup of grain every 3 days, where that tipping point is, because it's not a straightforward lineup. So we do just encourage people with wethers to stay away from grain diets and alfalfa as much as possible. If you have somebody who's behind the curve nutritionally and they need that extra supplementation, those more dense calories, you're welcome to take that risk. But we do know there's a pretty solid correlation between feeding grain-based diets and alfalfa-based diets to weathered goats and inducing urinary stone formation and blockage.
Well, and
Okay,
it's
thank
not
you.
just grains either. There's vegetables that can also cause problems too. So people think that giving your animals carrots every day is a good idea. And it's just, it's not good to give them something every day, I don't think. Like, especially, I don't know. You probably know way more about it, Dr. Worley, than I do, but
think of it like I don't want to go around giving my goats a bunch of cookies, and carrots are the goat version of a cookie. If you can stick to your grass hays, that's going to save you a lot of trouble, but not every goat can do that and still be a healthy weight.
All right, and it looks like Bob Simmons has a question.
Yeah, we're thinking of getting a small herd of baby goats, probably Nigerian dwarf, probably 4 or 5, and want to know if we should also try to get the mother of that small flock, or one of the mothers.
I'm gonna let Ronnie answer that question if she can.
there's no need. It doesn't matter.
Okay.
Yep.
Okay, at one point she mentioned that the mother teaches the kids, what things to forage on, and but they can figure it out. It sounds like.
Well, mostly, kids are going to eat what they're going to eat, but, the main thing about mothers teaching children is that they will go up to something that's poisonous that they shouldn't eat, and moms will sniff it and make this dramatic flaring snare. Let's like blow their nose. Like, I would never eat that. That's disgusting. And then the kids will go to it and they'll sniff it. They might mouth it a little. They're not going to eat it. And then they make that adorable, cute little, I would never eat this crap either. And so that's how they learn not to eat poisonous foods. Um, I I guess I just feel like animals always try stuff anyways, so the best way to just not have them exposed to poisonous foods is just make sure that you don't have any of those things on your property. And there is a website, Fiasco Farm, and they have an excellent poisonous list. So, and then you can use Google Lens to identify certain things that you're not familiar with on your property. But I don't think there's, and most people, I mean, I don't know. But for me personally, as a breeder, I'm not selling my mom with my kids. No way, man. I need her. I need her milk. That's the reason that I'm breeding. So, anyways, it's definitely not necessary for, and kids, they should be about 4 months by the time that they go with you, so they should have been able to learn a lot of stuff from their mom already.
All right. Well, thanks. Really appreciate that.
All right. Do we have any other questions? I think we have time for just a couple questions from you, Ronnie, but oh, it looks like Brienne has a question. So how much goat mineral does it take to make sheep ill? If, say, sheep were to accidentally get into the goat enclosure, how worrisome would it be? And can either of you answer that?
I would say in that direction, you're going to have more of a chronic issue. Whereas the other way around, if you have your sheep get into your goat mineral, copper toxicity is a little quicker to hit. But it is more of a chronic issue and less of an acute thing unless they're really gorging.
So you're saying that if the goats get into the sheep mineral, then that will become a chronic problem. But if sheep get into goat mineral, yeah, it's more of a toxicity issue or risk. Okay.
But there also are a lot of sheep varieties that need copper. Like mine need copper. I know Katie's need copper. So I'm not saying that you should let them intermingle with their minerals, but just know that. Fine, there's a lot of information, like especially if you're buying purebred animals, if you're picking an animal and you're sticking with that breed, a lot of them have their own information sheets and you can find that stuff out. It's not that hard. So.
And to follow up on that, Ronnie, yeah, you're right. This is Katie. My sheep actually, I have two breeds and they actually need different amounts of copper. So Wensleydales don't need as much as Valet Blacknose, and the research on that is we're just getting more information on how much they need. So it changes as well. So it's you have to really pay attention by breed.
Okay, good to know. All right, I had one question for you, Ronnie. So how did you educate yourself and learn how to take care of your herds when you were starting out? What did that journey look like for you?
I have a lot of books. But I also, when I started with the goats, I had a goat mentor and she was fabulous. And I still call her. I mean, I guess I haven't called her in quite a while, but I was that annoying person that called her a week after delivery and said, they're still bleeding out of their hoo-hoos. And she's like, yeah, no, it's okay. And why are they doing this? And why are they doing, so if you can find a mentor, that's fabulous. It's really a great way to go. Books, read books. There's a lot of the older books are, I think, better. And I have them on the shelf. And when one of my friends calls me or if I have an issue, I pull them all out and dig through them until I find something that works for me. There's a gal up in, I want to say the Squim area, Catherine. I don't know. I do a lot of holistic and organic treatments for my animals. And but if there's an issue, obviously I definitely do not shy away from pharmaceuticals if needed. But if I can fix things, and I have saved a ewe that was in pregnancy toxemia. And when I talked to a vet, they said that we have, I have a 50-50 chance. And anyways, I found resources for a detox tea in one of my books and it saved her life. The kids didn't survive. That's the first thing that's aborted, or it's the first thing to go. But anyways, yeah, that's how I learned. I didn't have a person for sheep. I just read a lot. I did a lot of classes online. I think it's University of Vermont. They do some stuff I think yearly. I don't know. Just pay attention to the farmer pages and sign up for mailing lists and go to these classes because when you interact with people that are doing that, Katie, when you interact with people that are actually doing it, there's so much information to glean, and I mean, I just met Katie recently and just hanging out with her for a while and just having conversations, and it was just awesome, the things that we learn by doing. And so if you can find yourself somebody to walk you through some things and tell you that, either you're not crazy or maybe you should change things up. And yeah, I think that's kind of it. And I will mention one thing that I wrote down in my notes about the presentation. Straw, I would not encourage anyone to use straw for bedding ever. It's already hollow and it's already breaking down and decaying. And so there's usually animals living in it. And so it's a very good way to get topical parasites on your animals. And then also cleaning it, if you clean by hand like I do with pitchfork and stuff, it's very difficult to break that stuff up. So I really don't, when people buy animals from me, I tell them to not use straw. So I'm just going to add that little 2
What do
cents
you
there.
use for bedding?
I use shavings.
Okay.
Yeah, 100% easy to clean up. You can run the poop fork through there and clean up turds and, and it picks up chunks of, if it's wet pee area, you can clean it up. It's just like scooping a cat box.
And then, Katie,
Except
we'll
if you
get
have
to
for
you.
sheep.
Oh, yeah. Go ahead.
So I can't use shavings because my long wool sheep, it gets stuck in their fleece. It's impossible to remove.
Oh,
But I have, so I use straw a lot, but I also, you have to, I have a smaller flock. I can hand check them too. So I think that makes a difference, if you're interacting with your animals and you can keep an eye on them in terms of parasites and things like that, and treating when you notice them. And Dr. Worley will say, steam clean, which also make sure you have an amazing vet. Before you get animals, check your local areas and see if they are available and or accepting ruminant patients. In Kitsap County and surrounding areas, we have a problem with that. There are not a lot. Luckily, Dr. Worley is my vet and she's awesome. But there aren't a lot of people and you still end up doing a lot of things on your own. I posted in the chat some of my favorite resources in terms of books that I can't live without. I have not had as much luck with mentors, but they are very important if you can find someone who has the time to be a mentor. And visit, if you're even considering getting animals, visit farms that have them and spend time there. And, like talk to people in your area about how much hay costs and, how much vet bills cost, and just listen to stories and learn from them because it's invaluable information and it's good to know what you're getting into. They're amazing animals, but it is, I think people often see wonderful pictures on Instagram and online of these cute, adorable goats and sheep and think that they're easy, and they're not, but they are living beings just like we are, and nothing about raising animals is easy. You have to make hard decisions all the time, and you lose animals. Sorry, I literally just started to cry when I said that. And you have to love them enough that you cry sometimes, you have to love them so much that matters more to you than money and things like that. Because otherwise you're you're doing them a disservice. So, and it's like, I hope that you find a way to make money raising sheep. But if you do, let the rest of us know. It is not easy. And you need to, first and foremost, do it because you love sheep and because you're interested in getting to know more about them. And if you make money doing it, awesome, but don't expect to, because it's farming is nearly impossible unless you already have land and no debt and lots of money and time and patience and access to resources. It's really difficult to make a living, any type of profit. A living is one thing. Making a profit on just sheep and a small number is really hard, and it depends on the type of sheep, and it depends on a million other factors. So, yeah. Anyway, I put some resources in the chat. Everyone's willing, or not willing, but I'm willing to chat with anybody anytime. You can come visit my farm, meet my sheep, meet all my other crazy birds, and see what my chaos is like every day. Feel free to reach out if you want to. But regardless, you need, if you decide to get animals, make friends with other farmers who have them, and they'll help. It's you need a tribe, or those days when you're covered and you've lost another animal despite trying everything. You need those people. So yeah, I don't know why I'm crying again. This is kind of embarrassing. Anyway, okay, so I actually don't cry that much. So
thank you for sharing your insights. That's very helpful to hear. All right, we are going to move on to Dr. Worley's presentation. And she's going to be covering all sorts of things about small ruminant health.
All right. Is that working well?
Yep, it's coming in.
Okay. So we're going to do a quick little review of kind of a general assessment of your sheep and goats, and then a few common emergencies or pickles that you might get yourself into having these critters. So first thing is out of the way. This is kind of what we're going to go over today. Number one is just how to assess your herd on a routine basis and how frequently that should happen. Number two is getting a little bit into deworming principles. There's a lot of chatter around kind of what works, what doesn't work, and you're going to have to find something that fits for your particular farm. But we'll go over kind of the guiding principles of how that discussion should happen. And then after that, we'll get into emergencies and a few common ones that I see frequently in this area, including trauma, bloat or choke, urinary obstruction, dystocia or difficult births, and then down animals. Okay. All right, so number one, when you're looking at your herd, there's a couple things that I want people to be taking note of on a regular basis. What we've got up on here on the screen is called the 5-point check. And this is put out by a group of South African sheep and goat herders who needed a little more help assessing the entire herd and looking at animals on a larger scale and not being able to put hands on everybody every day. So this 5-point check is an assessment of overall health, giving you an idea of the degree of intestinal parasitism that your animals may be dealing with. And this is one of the most common health problems that we see in these guys. So we're looking at number one, do we have any signs of anemia or pale mucous membranes? They're looking at the lower eyelid there, doing what's called a FAMACHA score. Number two, we're looking for edema or swelling underneath the jaw, another sign of intestinal parasitism. Number three is the body condition score on the back. We'll get into that in a little bit. Number four is scours or diarrhea. And five, nasal discharge, snotty noses, nasal blots. Okay. So that 5-point check is a good way to kind of scan your herd and say, hey, is someone having a problem? Is it a lot of these guys that are having a problem? Do I need to do something about it? To add on, because we're mostly seeing small producers or people that have these animals as pets or hobby farms, I would, as a veterinarian, kind of ask you to take an assessment of their hoof health and how well they're getting around. Do you see any signs of trouble? Are we keeping our feet in good condition? Do we have any splitting of the hoof wall? Do we have any moisture or inflammation in between the toes, suggesting some hoof rot? And then take a look at their coat or their fleece, really get down to the skin level and look for lice and other external parasites. As well, take a chance to look at the herd as a group. Is there anybody that's separating themselves? How are they behaving? Are they moving in their usual way? Are they communicating to each other in their usual way? And are they eating the way that they normally do? The last one is the stage of production. So this assessment and its frequency is going to vary a little bit based on what you're doing with these animals and how their life changes over the course of the year. In general, how frequently you can do this and to what degree depends on how many animals you have and how involved you can be with them. At a bare minimum, once a month would be great. So some common signs of illness in these kiddos, number one is going to be a change in behavior, such as separating themselves from the herd. And they are herd animals, and so I generally expect them to stay as a group. And if you've got somebody who's sitting off by themselves and they don't normally do that, that's a sign that you need to take a closer look at them. Reduced appetite, whether that's reduced interest in food or just not eating as much as they're supposed to, can be a good sign. A loss of mobility is usually a little more obvious. If you've got an animal that's down, you're going to note that pretty quickly. But even just, are they spending more time on their knees? And that can be a sign of hoof pain. A change in vocalization can be subtle, but if you've got an animal that never makes a noise and suddenly they're screaming, something's probably going on. And then lastly, stargazing or stumbling. So we see neurologic illness in these guys pretty commonly. And one of the more subtle signs is just a little trip in their walk. And it may escalate up to them throwing their head back and staring at the stars like they can read them. When you're looking at these kiddos, some signs of illness are going to be very obvious. So if we've got a wound or a mass, that's going to stand out pretty easily. A big limp is going to stand out pretty easily. Coughing or nasal discharge may be a little harder to spot. Diarrhea can be a little challenging to pick up on. Anything more than pellets that break apart easily when they hit the ground can be considered diarrhea in these kids. Bloating can be a little bit tricky to determine if an animal's truly bloated, but we'll get into that a bit. And then straining to urinate, I do want to put that on there because we will be talking about blocked goats a little bit. Some more subtle signs of illness that I see, especially in my aged sheep and goats, is going to be weight loss that's really slow, takes a few months to catch up with the animal. The sheep or goat that coughs occasionally, ones that have a bloat that kind of comes and goes, like they're okay for a while and then all of a sudden they're bloating again for no real reason. The ones that kneel more than usual, and then what we call ADR, ain't doing right. I don't really know what's going on, but something has changed. So if you do happen to, if you're paying attention to your herd, it's going to be much more easy to note when something is changing, and that's going to prompt a more thorough exam and maybe a call to a vet. Heading back to that 5-point check, we're going to get into body conditioning score a little bit. This is again kind of a herd level assessment of how healthy is the group. So the body condition score is a hands-on activity. I want everybody to feel on their sheep and goats. We're feeling for fat and muscle coverage over the lower spine and over the ribs in particular. We're not looking at the belly. This brown goat here has quite a prominent rumen going to both sides there, but we don't judge them based on that. We are looking for muscle and fat coverage instead, and the rumen doesn't count. So when you're doing this as a 5-point scale, where a number 1 is emaciated, these are animals that you can see their ribs and you can see their spine from a distance. You don't have to actually get up and touch them. 2 is just a little bit thin. You may sink your fingers into the depressions between their ribs, and those lumbar spinal vertebrae may be a little more prominent than we want. Number 3, we've got good muscle fill. We've got kind of a triangle shape when we're looking at that lumbar spine from the back. 4, we're starting to get what I would call well padded. And then number 5, these are animals that have kind of a tabletop shape or even a depression over their spine. These animals are obese. Generally, we want everyone to be about a 3. It is okay for our pregnant and nursing animals to kind of facilitate between a 2 to 4, but a 3 is ideal. Again, this is a hands-on activity, especially for our heavily wooled animals. If the animal on the left, I can't really tell from a distance how good their body condition score is until I really put hands on that animal. That animal may be a BCS of 1, but you can't tell because the wool's in the way. All right, part 2 of our herd health check is our FAMACHA score. So if you've done any sort of reading into sheep and goats and kind of how we look after these guys, the FAMACHA scores probably come up. And this is simply a tool to estimate the degree of anemia these animals are experiencing. We correlate anemia with intestinal parasite burden most commonly, although there are other things that can cause it. So what we're doing with the FAMACHA score is we're looking at the lower eyelid, the inside of the lower eyelid, and trying to grade on a 5-point scale how pink that lower eyelid is. There is an official training, I believe it's through Louisiana, I think are the only ones that are doing that training and handing out the actual FAMACHA cards if you would like an official card. But you can take a guesstimation without going through the training as well. We're looking for nice pink, healthy mucous membranes. Pale indicates that we should be deworming these animals, and white mucous membranes is a severe problem. We correlate that with a very low PCV, and that animal probably needs a blood transfusion at that point. Again, this is just a correlation tool. So like I said, there's other things that can cause anemia. If you know that your animal has very few parasites at this point, then you may have another health issue that you are dealing with. This is a herd level screening tool. So I want you to have it in your toolkit so that you can look at your animals and use this to help you make deworming decisions. Not every animal is going to need to be dewormed at the same time. And if you have animals that have really nice pink mucous membranes, they probably don't need deworming, and you can save that dewormer for somebody who does need it. You can also use this tool to help make some herd level decisions when it comes to culling animals or keeping them around. If you've got sheep or goats that are having trouble keeping a good FAMACHA score and you've dewormed them and treated them appropriately and they're still struggling, then maybe that's an animal you don't want in your herd. Maybe they're bringing down your production value a bit. Okay. And then as a side note, so the FAMACHA score estimates anemia. Anemia corresponds with intestinal parasitism, but only those blood-sucking intestinal parasites. So your barber pole worm is the main one that we think of there. These animals can still have other intestinal parasites that are causing them problems, but not making them anemic. And that's where fecal egg counts come in. So this is another tool we look at to assess whether or not we need to deworm and how we need to deworm. So a fecal egg count is when you go out, you collect poop samples from animals that you have an interest in, and we count eggs under the microscope, both by type and by number. So it will give you a quantitative number. You'll get your reports as eggs per gram of a particular type of worm egg. But again, this is used as an estimation of parasite burden. There's no one test that's going to tell you exactly how many worms your sheep or goat has. But this is a good tool to give you an estimate of what is there and in what quantity are those worms shedding eggs at this particular time. So one thing that you can do with this tool is also check the efficacy of your dewormer. If you're doing this kind of test, you want to take samples from at least 10 animals before you deworm them. 10 animals are 10% of the herd, depending on your numbers. Then you deworm them with whatever your preferred cocktail is. Then 14 days after that, you take another sample. You want your initial sample to have critters that have more than 250 eggs per gram, and you want to see a 95% reduction in that count before and after deworming. If that's not happening, you need to have a talk with your veterinarian because your dewormer is not doing what you want it to do. And there's various reasons for that. We do see worm resistance to the drugs that we have been using over and over again. And we are trying to kind of as a community work towards making smarter deworming decisions so that we limit that resistance. One of the things that you can do is to take those animals that are high shedders that consistently have fecal egg counts in the thousands or tens of thousands and get those animals out of your system because those animals are shedding enormous amounts of eggs and they are contaminating your pasture with enormous amounts of eggs, contributing to ongoing worm issues in the group. There is some evidence to support certain animals or certain breeds having higher genetic resistance to parasites. And we do know that the animal's individual immune system does come into play with how well they carry their worm burden. And so breeding for those traits can be helpful as well. Again, we kind of went through this. I did want to point out just on this slide, I've got two parasites up here. The bottom right picture is our Homunculus contortus, our barber pole worm. Many of our intestinal worms, our stomach worms, look quite similar under the microscope. And so they may all be grouped together in one large category. Kind of depends on what lab you send it to. And then that top picture is coccidia. And I do want to make a note about coccidia. This intestinal parasite, not so much a worm, more of a protozoa, causes diarrhea and wasting and disease in kids and lambs most commonly, or in animals that are ill for other reasons. And so generally in adult animals, they've built a tolerance to this parasite and we don't necessarily need to routinely deworm for it. But if you are raising kids or lambs, this is something to keep an eye on because it will sicken and can kill young animals quite easily. There are feeds out there that are medicated with treatment against coccidia. You do have to feed them to the level prescribed on the bag. And there are also oral medications that can be given to treat this parasite as well. But most of our common intestinal worm dewormers, so your cydectins and your panicures and all that, don't treat coccidia. It is a separate organism requiring different form of treatment. Okay. So when we talk about deworming, this is a detailed conversation, and it's going to be a little different for every particular farm, but in general, I want you making kind of guided deworming decisions, and deworming those animals that the 5-point check says, hey, they have a problem and you need to take care of these parasites. So if we've got a high FAMACHA score, we've got a thin animal or a low body condition score, that 5-point check is raising flags. We've got diarrhea, cough, bad coat, edema under the chin, or high fecal egg count. We're shedding a lot of worms right now. Those are some good reasons to be deworming your sheep and goats. We do know that there is a rise in egg shedding as a ewe or doe gets closer to parturition, so it gets closer to her due date. There's a loss of immune function in that ewe or doe, leading to an increase in parasitic egg shedding. And so it is a good idea to go ahead and deworm your moms within about a month of our lambing or kidding time, depending on the dewormer you're using. And that helps reduce the amount that she is shedding into the environment and reduce the amount that those kids are taking in. This can be done about the same time as her tetanus vaccine in that last trimester, if you will. And then if you are dealing with a situation where you are traveling with your animals, you're bringing in new kiddos, or you have a population that is really young, really old, has some compromised immune system, and is sick for other reasons, generally that's when we're going to be looking to deworm those kiddos. Or if we have a situation where we've got crowding, so too many animals in too little space, or we can't separate ourselves from the fecal material very easily, that is when we're going to be deworming more frequently. I would encourage you not to deworm just because we feel like it, or it's the first of the month, or if you've got fat, happy lambs, we probably don't need to deworm those. because all you're doing then is creating a population of worms that will survive that deworming and will kind of turn their nose up at your dewormer. And then I guess as a general reminder, these are intestinal parasites, and so primarily these animals are pooping out the worms onto your pasture and then kind of re-ingesting them as they go through their life cycle. So that's where your rotational grazing can help. If you're moving them to new pasture, allowing that pasture to rest, allowing that pasture to grow beyond where the worms are able to climb up, you can limit the amount of parasites that your herd is ingesting. So that's where we get into a little bit of our alternatives or adjunctive treatments for deworming. So pasture management, Claire kind of talked through rotational grazing. We want to leave 3 to 4 inches of grass. We want to encourage our animals to browse or graze on taller plants beyond the reach of these intestinal larvae, and then allow adequate recovery time for your pasture to come back. Generally, if you are maintaining your animals in good body condition and you have adequate supplemental nutrition, their immune system is going to be a little stronger to fight off or to balance out with intestinal parasite infestations. Other things, talked a little bit about selective culling or breeding based on individual FOMACHA scores and response to the parasite burden they're being asked to bear, and then taking a look at everybody frequently. The other 2 things I have on here are things that anybody can kind of add into their herd management plan. So copper oxide wire particles, these are copper wire chips in capsule form that can help kind of limit the turnover of intestinal parasites. So it is a source of copper. It's a kind of a slow release form. It sits in the abomasum. So be very cautious with sheep because they are more susceptible to copper toxicity. But in general, you're going to be safe if you're given between 0.5 to 1 gram to your kids or lambs and 1 to 2 grams to adults. In heavily parasitized environments, this can be repeated every 6 weeks. I would say up here, once or twice a year is much more common. And this is given via bolus gun. So if you don't have that, you're going to need one of those to get this down your animal. The other thing on here is the bioworma. This is a fungi that actually traps the worm larvae in the feces before they have a chance to hatch out and go through the rest of their life cycle. So it is fed to the animals to help reduce the reintroduction of worms into the animal. Okay. Yes, really quickly, if there's any questions, and we can go into emergencies a bit. Claire, you are muted.
I was saying, I'm not seeing any questions in the chat.
Okay, great. All right, so emergencies, everyone's favorite. First, I would encourage everyone to have a first aid kit to know what's in it and to know where to find it. Make sure that everything is up to date. You'll find a lot of different resources out there that list different things you need in your first aid kit. I don't really care which one you use, as long as you have the tools to keep an animal safe and keep it secure and keep yourself safe and address any emergent needs in that moment. So this is kind of a good starter list, and we can share this presentation afterwards so that everybody has it. But in general, flashlight, something to secure the animal, something to keep yourself clean, gloves and lube. Hoof trimmers or a multi-tool goes a long way. Something to wash a wound with or flush an eye with. Some good oral meds on there for just general health things. We've got electrolyte supplements, probiotics, propylene glycol for a source of nutrition. Same thing with the NutriDrench. And then bandage material. Your bandage bucket is kind of up to you, but generally something non-adhesive and something to secure it in place. And then as a note, splints, you're welcome to go buy your fancy splints if you want, but PVC pipe cut in half and well padded works just fine temporarily. Okay, so principles of emergency management in general. Number one is to keep yourself and any friends you have out there safe. So regardless of what's going on, you need to make sure that it's more than just you if you can, that you are going to be safe to walk out to and approach the animal. You can see where you're going and you're not going to fall into a mud pit. That you can secure the animal or animals, whether that's one and you've got a halter or just a big hug, great. Or are you dealing with a herd that you need to get everybody to a safe location in a calm way? These are herd animals. They are very flighty, even if they know you. And so when they are in pain or distressed or have had something traumatic happen, their first response is to try to get away. And so I want you thinking ahead of time how to mitigate that, how to get them into a smaller, more secure space without hurting yourself. Step two is to triage the animal to kind of assess them. Number one, are they alive? Are they breathing okay? Are they alert? Are they aware of what's going on? We'll go through vital signs real quick. We check for any major bleeding wounds, and then we'll go through determining if they can get up and move themselves to safety or if that's something you're going to have to facilitate for them. Number three is to actually treat the emergent needs. I have CPR on here with a big old question mark. If you've got babies, potentially chest compressions can do you some good. If you have adult sheep and goats, generally their chest is not compliant enough, it's not squishable enough to actually do much good with CPR. And so generally that's not a component of emergent triage in these kiddos. Next step would be looking at temperature issues, which you do see a fair bit around here. Everybody gets really cold really fast after a shock event. And so making sure that you have some way to warm them back up, or if we do have to get really hot weather, a way to cool them down. Stabilizing fractures, relieving bloat, kind of treating anything that's going to cause death or a crisis in the next 30 minutes is something you can do wherever you find the animal. And then transport them to further care, whether that's just into your barn, into someplace clean and dry and warm, or whether that's down the road to the veterinarian or having them come out to you. The principles of this is you want to be able to do it calmly and you want to be able to do it safely without causing any further injury to you or the animal itself. Again, safety is a priority here, and that is human safety over animal safety. If you happen to get yourself into a situation where we have somebody fall down into a ravine or a mud pit and we need a rescue team and extraction tools, we do have a local search and rescue group. I put their number and website here. They will come out for that sort of thing. Do call them ahead of time. But in general, make sure that you know what you're getting into wherever this animal is. You've got good lighting. Headlamps are great. You've got good footing. You have a plan for how to restrain the animal. You have a means to sedate or call someone if you think you're going to need that, and then a way to transport. Got a picture up here of a cow in the back of a pickup surrounded by a fence panel, and I would encourage you to have a slightly better plan than that. Know what you're going to do ahead of time. Okay. So vital signs in general, sheep and goats, temperature should be somewhere between 100 and 103. Heart rate 60 to 120 beats per minute, respiratory rate 10 to 30 respirations per minute, and our mucous membranes pink and moist. We talked through FAMACHA. You assess the same location to get a sense of, are we pale enough to need a blood transfusion? Have we had a major bleed somewhere? Are we very shocky? Okay. Take a look at their mentation. Are they unconscious? Are they dull and quiet? Are they bright and alert and maybe just, dinged their toe on something? Or are they panicked? And if they are panicked, first step is to try and secure them or make them feel comfortable enough to prevent further injury. And then as a side note, if you've got an animal that's in trouble and they're very thin, keep in the back of your mind, they're going to have trouble keeping themselves warm. If they're very overweight, they're going to have trouble cooling down. And both of those are going to potentially limit your mobility. Bleeding. Number one, if you have an animal that's bleeding, don't panic. It's okay. Keep them calm, get them triaged, and then figure out where the bleeding is coming from. Make sure that your animal is warm and not so shocky and out of the mud so that you can clean whatever wound there is just with warm water. That's fine. And then apply pressure for 5 to 10 minutes with hopefully something clean, but whatever you got, it's okay. If after 5 minutes you don't get stopping of the bleeding, or if it seems real dramatic to begin with, we're shooting blood across the room, feel free to call the vet. But in the meantime, keep your pressure going to try and provide some hemostasis. I would encourage you to call the vet if your animal is pale, weak, or has large wounds that will need treatment, which in a lot of cases, if we've got impressive bleeding, we do. And then please do not put a tourniquet on. I'm just going to say that as a hard rule. There are exceptions. But in general, tourniquets applied improperly or left on for longer than they should be can cause more harm than good. And you can lose limbs because of them. So pressure over the source is going to be the best way. Trauma. So trauma covers a whole range of things. What I see most commonly in this area is a predator attack, usually a dog or bird of prey. We've had some mountain lion reports, but generally they're going after young animals, and that's usually not very successful for the young animal. Second most commonly is they get tangled in something on the farm, some piece of equipment or some fencing. Goats in particular are really good at hurting themselves in creative ways. So do what you can ahead of time to try and make sure that there's little that they can cause trouble with. We do occasionally see falling or trampling issues, especially during transport. And then I put gunshot wounds on there. It's fortunately not common, but it is in other areas. So again, any trauma, doesn't matter what it is, treat the animal first. Make sure that they are calm and warm and not shocky, and manage the bleeding, and then go for the wound. It's very tempting if you walk up on somebody that's got a big old scrape or laceration to go for the wound immediately, but the animal comes first. So some tips and tricks for warming. A heat lamp is lovely if you've got them. Just be careful. Hair dryers are absolutely wonderful. If you've got access to power, a hair dryer is a great way to warm an animal up really quick. Blankets or towels in your dryer, and then dry rice in a sock microwaved for 30 seconds at a time. Makes a really nice warming bag. And you want to put these where they're going to do the most good, so up in the flanks where we've got large blood vessels. Wound care in general, step 1, make sure the animal's okay. Step 2, clean the wound. Water of neutral temperature and a little bit of soap is perfectly fine. Gently remove any debris that's there, hair and bedding and mud and whatnot. And then once you have a clean wound, go ahead and disinfect it. There's a whole host of disinfectants out there. I prefer to start with some dilute iodine or chlorhexidine. Other people use peroxide, and that's okay, but I would only do it once. Once your wound has been disinfected, go ahead, pat it dry, put a bandage on. You can use a liquid bandage like the Alu Shield or other spray-on bandages. Silver honey ointment's lovely. And then if we are placing a physical cotton bandage, I would encourage you to make it larger than you think it needs to be, and very well padded so that we're not accidentally tightening it down too much. And then these are barn animals, so please put some fly spray around the wound. Okay. So a lot of this is stuff that you guys can do at home without calling for additional help wound-wise. In general, if we've got small wounds, if we've got superficial wounds, scrapes in particular, and if we're on the bulky parts of the body, so the neck, the back, the side of the belly, all of those are going to be fine to treat at home, and they should heal within 1 to 2 weeks. Where I would strongly encourage you to get a vet and some antibiotics involved are wounds that are into deeper tissue, particularly puncture wounds, crush injuries, bites, and burns, as they are often going to develop into something worse than they initially looked. If you've got wounds that are near a joint or on the lower limbs, on the face, especially ones that may interfere with normal eating, and then nasty, nasty wounds. So if there's swelling, if they're smelly, if there's pus, or not healing within a week or two, please get your veterinarian involved, as they likely require more intensive treatment. Okay. Emergency number 2, bloat. So you're raising sheep and goats are ruminants, and they have this wonderful vat of bacteria and protozoa and fungi that work together to ferment fiber into something that they can actually use. But sometimes this rumen goes wrong. So normally the bugs in the rumen will take your fiber, they'll make it into usable fatty acids and proteins and whatnot, and they excrete a bunch of gas. We see bloat if we've got an issue where your animal's not able to burp up or pass on that gas appropriately. The problem with bloat is the rumen takes up most of the abdomen, and when it becomes gas distended and does not move and inflates like a balloon, we start to put pressure on the major blood vessels and on the chest, and that prevents normal breathing, normal blood return, and we can see death relatively quickly. So if you see an animal that looks bloated, the first thing I want you to do is actually put your hands on it. The rumen will change size and shape relatively commonly, and you may have an animal that has a bigger rumen today than yesterday, but as long as it's very soft and squishable and depressible, I would keep an eye on that, but it's not necessarily emergent. The ones where we do need treatment emergently is where we've got a big, tense, distended abdomen that you cannot depress, or an animal that's standing there with his elbows cocked out to the side, really working to breathe. That is an emergency. So when we're talking about bloat, we've got 2 main types that we categorize into: free gas bloat and frothy bloat. Frothy bloat I see when we turn an animal out on really lush pasture or legume pasture, so your clover type or grain, and we see a foamy production of gas. So this gas is trapped within a matrix of protein and unable to escape into something that's big enough for the animal to burp out. Our free gas bloats are usually where we have an issue in the actual burping process. So either something is stuck in the esophagus and the animal's unable to eructate, or the nerves going to the esophagus and the rumen aren't working well. We can see that after bad pneumonias, or we've got a disturbance in the rumen microbiota, or some sort of metabolic disturbance such as milk fever. The symptoms kind of went through this a little bit. They may be standing off by themselves. You'll see usually a big belly, the left side more so than the right. They may be reluctant to move, breathing really fast, or working really hard at it. They may be painful, kicking at their abdomen. And then sometimes you'll find these guys as a sudden death, unfortunately. Treatment. I would encourage you to find a buddy to teach you how to tube sheep and goats. If this is something you're looking into doing, I wouldn't just go at it on your own. I would have someone show you first, because it can go wrong in a number of ways. But treatment is to relieve the bloat. So step 1 is to pass the stomach tube and try and give that gas somewhere to go. You'll see with a free gas bloat that is it. That solves your problem and life is great. With a frothy bloat, you'll pass that tube and get nothing back, and you'll see a bunch of foam on the end of your tube when it returns. Frothy bloat does require additional treatment with some sort of surfactant that's going to break up that foamy liquid and turn it into free gas again. So there's a bunch on the market, the Duravet bloat treatment, the TheraBloat, and then your vegetable and mineral oils are an option as well. In general, if there's an underlying cause, taking that animal away from that underlying cause is going to go a long way towards preventing them from bloating again. And then under free gas bloat, I have here two other options. So if you pass a tube and you can't relieve that bloat and this animal is really struggling, on their way out, trocherizing the rumen or stabbing it, for lack of a better word, is one way to relieve that bloat and save that animal's life. But you then do have a rumen that's potentially leaking fluid into the abdomen. So I would call your vet definitely at that point, because you're going to have secondary complications. And the surgical ruminotomy is uncommon, but can serve the same purpose. Bloat prevention, a lot of it comes down to pasture and feed management, especially for frothy bloat. If you know you have bloat-prone animals or bloat-prone pasture, try to turn them out in the afternoon as opposed to the morning, and feed them hay or supplemental feed before you turn them out so they go out on a full belly and they're not spending as much time on that legume pasture. There are options out there to pre-treat both the animal and the pasture with anti-bloat treatment, if you do have an issue where you're seeing this recurrently. And then try, like we talked about before, try to stick to a grass hay-based diet, avoid sudden changes in diet, and stick to larger particle sizes and higher fiber content if you can. If you have a concern, if you're a little suspicious about somebody, pull them off feed, put them on a dry lot for 12 to 24 hours and see how they go, and then cautiously turn them back out for short periods of time. Just a quick note on choke, as it can lead to a bloating episode. When we say choke, it gets a little confusing. Most people think, like with a person, that the animal has inhaled something. But when we talk about choke in livestock, we're talking about an esophageal obstruction, so something stuck in the esophagus, not the airway. That's not to say it's not an emergency, but it's a little less emergent than if something is stuck in the airway. With a choke, the animal is going to be drooling a ton and swallowing a ton and trying to pass that bolus that's stuck. And so what you'll see most commonly is feed coming from the mouth or nose, a lot of saliva, and they may stand there with their head extended. And again, we may see bloat secondarily. Now, because they are standing there drooling and kind of salivating excessively and swallowing and trying to get that feed down, you can have aspiration pneumonia as a secondary complication to a choke. Again, the treatment is quite similar to a bloat. It's passing a tube down and trying to move that obstruction along, in or out. And prevention comes down to limiting access to things that may induce a choke. So reducing competition amongst your animals, especially if you've got sheep and goats that are all bolting for a really great new pile of grain, trying to spread that out and slow down their intake helps a lot. Emergency number 3 is going to be urinary obstruction. This, unfortunately, is relatively common, especially in our castrated male goats, but sheep as well. Part of it comes down to the inherent anatomy of a goat. That blue diagram there shows their urinary tract from bladder to penis, and we've got a big, long urethra with a giant S-curve in it. So when we're making urinary stones, that is a long tract to get them stuck in. Female goats and sheep can make stones, but we don't see it so much as a problem because their tract is much shorter. If you've got an animal that's blocked, the things you're going to see is a lack of urine production. They are going to stand out and try and pee, and sometimes I'll get people saying that I think my goat is trying to poop. It looks like he's trying to poop because his tail is flagging and nothing's happening. But check for urination. So if you haven't seen them pee in a few hours, that would be much more common than the animal that can't poop. They are painful. They may vocalize, especially when their abdomen is touched. And they may be focusing all their energy on this, so they're not going to be eating. They may be separated or depressed, and you may see a little bit of a abdominal distension as well. Treatment comes down to clearing that obstruction, and this does usually end up being a surgical process. In the lucky few, we can kind of trim the end of the penis, and sometimes it's just one stone stuck there and that's it, and they're fine. But most of the time they're going in for a fairly major surgery that's going to change the way that they urinate from there on out. So we do try to do everything we can to prevent this, as it gets quite costly and quite hard on the animal as well. And then as a side note, if you have an animal that, maybe has blocked in the past or is partially obstructed, ammonium chloride is used to acidify the urine. It's added to the feed, and should be done under kind of careful supervision and monitoring of urine pH to make sure that it's actually effective in doing what we want. Acidifying the urine does help dissolve some stones, not all stones, but our struvite type stones can be dissolved and prevented with more acidic urine. Prevention is, there's a lot of things that we've tried. Usually when we have a list this long, it means that nothing's a smoking gun. So number one is going to be to lay castration in animals that you want to keep as wethers for longer periods of time. So if you're wethering a goat for one show season and then they are going to the butcher, this is not so big of an issue. But if you're wethering a goat to be used as a pet, I would highly encourage you to delay it till they're 4 to 6 months old, as we know that time, being an intact animal, allows for their urethra to increase in diameter and potentially limit stones getting stuck. Again, feeding a diet avoidant of grain and legumes, but more specifically, as was brought up in the chat, to keep the calcium to phosphorus ratio at 2 to 2.5 to 1, to try and limit the calcium buildup in the urine. Adding salt to the diet is fantastic in general, but especially for these guys, as the more salt they take in, the more water they will drink. And the more dilute their urine is, the less likely stones are to form. For certain types of stones, we're going to avoid plants high in oxalates. The thing that comes to mind is spinach, but there's quite a list out there that I'm sure you can find. And then avoid pasture with high amounts of silica in the soil for silica stones. The picture here, this is a goat that's had a tube cystotomy, so he will pee out of that Foley catheter until he is able to dissolve his stones on his own, or potentially for much longer. Emergency number 4, I think, is down animals. Down animals just refers to anybody that is unable to rise on their own. So the list of causes is quite long. I've listed a few here. Things that'll come up quite commonly on sheep and goat discussion boards are polio, which is a thiamine deficiency, vitamin B1. Ruminants normally make this in their rumen. And so if you have a goat that is, or sheep that's eating well and has a very functional rumen, it's not something I'm super worried about. But anything that disturbs that rumen can lead to a thiamine deficiency and therefore polio. Also in here, we've got tetanus. If you are castrating your own animals, including band castrations or docking tails, please ensure that their moms and they have had a tetanus vaccine, as tetanus is everywhere, and goats in particular are quite susceptible to it. The picture here is of a goat that has tetanus. And unfortunately, it's not a very survivable condition in most cases. Other things that we'll see commonly are milk fever, low calcium shortly after birth. Diet plays a big role in that, as well as the number of babies we're having and how much milk these animals are producing. And then one that I see here, unfortunately, is malnutrition or emaciated animals. Those that are not in good body condition are more likely to go down and not be able to get up because of that. But again, the list is long. The big thing with down animals is to treat the underlying cause, whatever it may be. And if you can fix that and the animal is bright and alert and eating and drinking and doing well enough with supportive care, a lot of times you can get those guys back up again. Supportive care comes down to good nursing care. So putting them in reach of food and water and making sure they're able to take it in. Propping them up with some straw bales so they're not just lying flat. That's not great for an animal that is regurgitating all the time. And then making sure that they are shifting positions so we're not getting bed sores, helping them stand to keep those muscles and nerves working well, and keeping them clean and dry, and providing a space with good footing and deep bedding. And I think this is the last one I have, but dystocia or difficult birth. So if you are raising lambs and kids, if you are having animals give birth, you need to be prepared for dystocias. It's not going to happen to everybody, but it will happen at some point. And so I would encourage you to be aware of what a normal birth looks like and know when to step in case of abnormalities. So common causes of dystocia, for the ewe, exhaustion can do it, especially if she's having multiples or if she's a first-time mom. First-time labor in general, these animals generally have narrower pelvises and are going to have a little more trouble passing larger kids and lambs. Poor nutrition or hypocalcemia going into this process, I'll put preg tox in that category as well. Anatomical abnormalities, so a twisted uterus or a ringworm where the cervix doesn't dilate appropriately, is somewhat common in sheep, and then a vaginal prolapse kind of falls in that same category. On the kids side of things, if we've got a fetus that is sitting or trying to come out in the wrong alignment, that I would say is the single most common issue in sheep and goats. Is we've got babies that are didn't read the book and are coming out in all sorts of fun positions. Size mismatch, where a baby's too big for mom, will ultimately lead to a C-section. An abortion or a dead fetus, a lot of times labor is driven by signals from the fetus itself. And so if the fetus is not alive to give those signals, you're going to have a difficult birth. And then a deformed fetus, so your cyclopia, your extra limbs, all that good stuff. But malposition is usually, I would say, the most common and the one where you can do the most good. So normal position is 2 front feet and a nose from the same baby. If we're having multiples, you got to make sure that you've got all the right body parts from one baby, or you're gonna have a really, really hard time. Everything else listed on this little chart here is abnormal. You can get a baby out safely in a posterior presentation, so where we've got 2 back feet from the same baby, but there's a little greater risk of injury to mom as opposed to a normal presentation. So a normal labor, we should see the cervix dilate and the fetus position itself, and mom is probably just going to separate herself, maybe stop eating, look a little crampy for about 12 to 24 hours. Stage 2, this is when the actual babies are coming out. We're getting active contractions or pushing from mom. This is rapid, especially in sheep and goats. I wouldn't, more than 1 hour per fetus is a little abnormal, although our first time moms may take a bit longer, but more than 1 to 2 hours is abnormal. And then stage 3 is expelling the placentas. Usually this comes pretty quickly after the fetus. It is considered a medical emergency if it is retained beyond 12 hours. If you're going to be helping in dystocias with your animals, I would encourage you at the bare minimum to have a separate first aid kit with OB lube, so obstetrical lube, shoulder length gloves, please, a bucket you can put warm water in, some towels to keep everybody clean, and then some form of soft cloth strap. This could be anything you can come up with. I'm a fairly big fan of dog leashes. They work quite well. Step 1, you've got to figure out where your baby is, where your baby parts are, and make sure you've got 2 front legs and a nose or 2 back legs assigned to the same fetus. Once you've got that figured out, you can push the baby back in to try and make sure you've got all the right baby parts, and then gently pull back out. Please be careful. These are small animals, and you can do a lot of damage, cause a lot of trauma to mom if we're too rough or too fast. More lubrication is always better in this case. In general, if you are seeing mom actively laboring, so we are pushing and pushing and pushing, and it's been 30 minutes to an hour, I would give your vet a call and at the very least give him a heads up. But we probably need some assistance at that point. And I'd much rather receive a call, say, hey, something's going on, and then not have to come out than to get the call 5 hours later and come out to destruction everywhere. If you have been assisting this ewe or this doe for about 30 minutes and it's just not happening, please call your veterinarian. That one may need a C-section. If you cannot find or feel a live fetus, please go ahead and give your veterinarian a call. Sometimes anatomical variants or like I was saying, dead fetuses can be a little harder to get out. And then if you or doe is acting sick at all, labor is tiring, and so we give some grace for that. But if she's showing any other signs of illness, please give your veterinarian a heads up. And then after labor, please check everybody over. So just because the baby's out and the placenta's out doesn't mean everything's done. Go ahead and check your mom for injury, bruising, tears, things like that. Is she able to get up on her feet after labor pretty quickly? Is she willing to eat and drink for you? All those things. The placenta, like I said, should pass within about 12 hours. And then check your lambs and kids over. This lamb here did not have lips that opened. And then once we were able to get past that, it also had a pretty bad cleft palate. So check them over, check everybody for a cleft palate, because those babies are not going to be able to nurse on their own. They will accidentally inhale that colostrum. If you do have normal babies, go ahead and make sure that they get adequate colostrum intake pretty quickly, ideally within the first 12 hours. And then a quick note on pregnancy prevention. So we don't have any amazing birth control in these guys. Castration is a great tool. Ideally, you can keep everybody separate. Use 2 lines of fencing because fence line breeding does happen. Maintain a herd of only females and rent your studs or use AI. And then castration we talked about. And if you are keeping ewes or does as pets, spaying is an option. It can help prevent some reproductive cancers down the line and some unwanted side effects of having milking animals and no need to milk, such as a precocious udder. Got some sources, and then does anybody have any questions at this point?
All right, it doesn't look like we have any other questions. So yeah, we can end the class. And I just want to say again, thanks to everyone for being here. And thank you so much to Ronnie and to Dr. Worley, and also to Katie for sharing all her experiences with farming. And yeah, it's a great class with lots of knowledge sharing. All right, thanks so much, everyone. Have a good night.